Well, it's only a few more days before I board an Amtrak train with my bicycle and head to Seattle, where I'll begin a 1,500-mile ride to Jackson, Wyoming. Before heading west from my home in Vermont, however, I'd like to share a bit of my tour planning process with you, as well as what my style of bicycle travel costs. At the end of this video, I'll break down the expenses from last fall's ride down the Pacific Coast from Seattle to the San Francisco Bay Area. Let's begin with trip planning, but first, a little personal history. I set out on my first Trans-America ride in May of 1985, leaving the Pacific Coast at Cape Disappointment near the mouth of the Columbia River. I had just left my job, ended a relationship, and was heading back to my home state of Vermont to start anew. I had invested most of my money I had at the time in my touring bicycle, but I'd reserved $1,000 to cover the cost of 100 days on the road. I wasn't broke, but I was very close. My best friend Marion had offered me a winter stay at her home in Idaho and then drove me to the coast in the spring. When planning my bicycle trip, I was aware of Bike Centennial's Trans-America route, but the very reasonably priced maps from the organization were something I opted not to purchase. I knew that I wanted to go coast to coast while passing through some scenic areas I'd driven through before. I knew which states I'd passed through on my way from the Pacific to the Atlantic, so I simply stopped near the border of each state as I came to it, perhaps at a welcome center or a gas station, and picked up a copy of the official state map. In Kansas, a cashier at a grocery store gave me the state map that she had in her car. I plotted my route across each state, then repeated the process at the next border I came to. There was no internet, there were no smartphones, nothing electronic, period, just a paper map. The maps would show mileages along segments, towns I'd passed through, and icons noting state parks, national parks, or national forests where I might find a place to lie down for the night. My budget did not include camping expenses, so my overnight stops most commonly included stealth camping. I paid for camping twice along that 5,000-mile plus ride across America. I slept out of sight on a lot of public land and in many town parks across the Midwest and eastern states. I benefited from the generosity of strangers that I'd met along the way who offered me a yard, a porch, or local knowledge about places I could camp nearby. My food was mostly purchased in grocery stores. However, I did become fond of the local diners for breakfast. Pancakes were often the cheapest offering on the menu. A stack of pancakes and coffee eventually became my standard morning order. My trip planning is much different today. How did we ever plan a trip without the internet? On the quiet days of winter, while the snows stack up outside the window, I head for my favorite online resources, beginning with the Adventure Cycling Association, headquartered in Missoula, Montana. Since their early days as Bike Centennial and that first Trans-America route that they laid out in 1976, the organization has continued to map bike-friendly routes that now crisscross the country. Recently, Adventure Cycling has partnered with the folks at the navigation app Ride with GPS and added full-featured digital route maps to their offerings. For the past couple of years, those digital maps have become my starting point for planning my trips. In addition to mapping bike-friendly routes that can be navigated with turn-by-turn prompts, the digital routes include most of the other information that's always been so valuable on the ACA's paper map products. Campsites, motels, grocery stores, restaurants, bike shops, libraries, and many other points of interest that cyclists might seek out along the way. I begin my trip planning by linking together the various ACA map segments that I plan to ride. My next ride will include the ACA's Northern Tier route from Seattle to Glacier National Park. From there, I'll turn south to Missoula, where I'll pick up the ACA's original Trans Am route and follow it to West Yellowstone. Finally, I'll turn south on the route that I'd traveled in 1985 down the west side of the Tetons, over Teton Pass, and on to the trip's conclusion in Jackson, Wyoming. Using the digital route information, I've been able to look for camping opportunities at regular intervals and plot out a loose itinerary for the 33 days that I'll be on the road. My plans are then compiled in an online document that I can access from the road. When doing my digital scouting for camping opportunities, I've come to rely also on the website of gobikecamping.com. It's a great source for locating campsites that have hiker-biker sites with reduced rates for cyclists. While I still prioritize low or no-cost camping opportunities, my trip budget is not as tight as it was on my first Trans Am ride. When I ended that trip, I had 73 cents remaining, a collection of coins in a plastic film canister. That was all the money I had to my name after the ride. I still have that canister and coins among mementos that I've saved from the trip. For food along the way, I rely heavily on Google Maps to locate grocery stores and diners. At night, in camp, I often find myself looking for options in the towns I'll ride through on the following morning. For overnight stays at someone's home, town parks, schools, churches, or a farmer's field, I found that those opportunities present themselves along the way, usually after face-to-face interactions with locals that I meet in person, commonly leading to generous offers. As for the logistics of getting to and from the start and end points of my ride, I rely primarily on the Amtrak network. As a general rule, I gave up plane travel 20 years ago and now ride the rails. Over the years, Amtrak has become increasingly bike-friendly and now offers a variety of options for traveling with your bike. On some routes, there are reservable hanging bike racks right inside the passenger cars. On others, there are baggage cars with hanging bike racks inside. At stations that have baggage service, you simply hand your bike up to the baggage attendant from trackside. The option that I use for my train travel includes an Amtrak bike box, which are also available at stations with baggage service. The box is purchased at the baggage counter for $25. The box is large enough for the entire bike to simply roll inside once the pedals have been removed and the handlebars turn 90 degrees from their normal orientation. The box is then taped closed and checked as one of my allowed bags in the baggage car. For added protection, I pad my frame using foam pipe insulation that can be purchased at most hardware stores, cut to length and secured around the frame tubes. So what does it all cost? Let me begin by saying that for all of my bike travels, I've had limits on my budget. I know that there are many who travel light and comfortably while relying on a small rectangle of plastic in the wallet, staying in motels and eating in restaurants along the way. I prefer to camp, prepare much of my food, and treat myself to a good pint of beer here and there along the way. So let's look at the numbers. I'll break it down into the major categories, which include getting myself and my bike to and from the trip's start and end points, overnight accommodations, which are primarily campsite fees, and food, which includes grocery stores, diners, and the occasional pub. It's really quite simple. Eat, sleep, ride, enjoy a pint, relax, and repeat. Beginning with the transportation to the start of the ride and then home again afterward, last year's train fare totaled $640, which included the bike box fees. Add to that the $65 fuel cost for Marion to drop me off at the Albany Amtrak station and then pick me up on my return. It should be noted that Marion, the best friend who had dropped me off at the Pacific Coast in 1985 for my first Trans-America ride, is still my best friend, who is also now my wife. Of the 29 nights spent camping along the way, I paid for a campsite for 21 nights. The total cost for camping was $220, for an average cost at hiker-biker sites of about $10.50. My grocery bill for the month came to $671. Add to that the $394 spent in restaurants along the way, and my total food and beverage cost for the month was a little over $1,000. Finally, there were a few miscellaneous trip supplies like stove fuel, a ferry ticket, etc. When all was said and done, the total cost of that 30-day trip came to less than $2,000, which works out to about $42 a day for my expenses along the way. Looking ahead to my next trip, which begins in a few days, I've budgeted $670 for transportation to and from the start and end points. That includes train fare, the Amtrak bike box, and a van shuttle from Jackson, Wyoming to the Amtrak station in Salt Lake City, Utah. For the shuttle, my bike needs to be boxed. I could locate a bike box at a bike shop in Jackson, but rather than introduce any unknowns into the logistics, Marion will ship my hard shell case to Jackson in time for my arrival. My bike will be packed in it for the shuttle to the train station and will remain in the case as checked baggage while aboard the train for the trip back home. This year, I'm budgeting $50 a day for food and camping on the days that I'm biking. Add to that $25 a day for food on the days aboard the train. I should note that I bring aboard all of the food that I'll need for the train trips. Essentially, I camp out in my seat as I cross the country by rail, cooking my meals and making my coffee in the electric hot pot that I'll ship home from Seattle. All in all, I have a total of $2,500 budgeted for this year's trip. When measured in today's dollars and spread across the total number of days for each ride, that's 2.5 times the daily cost of my first Trans Am ride in 1985, but I still consider it to be a very inexpensive way to travel. To be sure, there are many ways and many different styles to travel by bike. My style, the one I've outlined here, is just one option, but hopefully this video can serve as a starting point for thinking about planning and funding your own adventures by bike. So, for me, it's time to get back in the saddle and ride. I'll see you on the road.